This SMNI News Channel. Truth that matters.
Good evening, Philippines, and good day, world. I'm Jayne Codnita. It's Tuesday, the 18th of July, 2023, and you're watching Newsline World. We're here to bring you the top stories we've gathered from all over the globe. First, the International Criminal Court's Appeals Chamber rejects the Philippines' efforts to block a probe into former President Duterte's drug war. United States President Joe Biden invites Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the U.S. amid tensions between the two countries. However, former Prime Minister Yair Lapid says the U.S. is no longer Israel's closest ally. A U.S. soldier crosses into North Korea from South Korea's demilitarized zone unauthorized. President Bongbong Marcos signs Maharlika Investment Fund Act into law. And Australia cancels the 2026 Commonwealth Games due to the immense financial burden associated with hosting such a large-scale event. These and more for tonight's edition of Newsline World. Recently, an unidentified United States national defected to North Korea from the South Korean side of the joint security area while in the heavily fortified demilitarized zone. Sela Yoon files this report.
On Tuesday, the United Nations or UN Command said a U.S. citizen has crossed over from South Korea to North Korea without authorization. Reports say the defector was a U.S. soldier. However, still remains unclear whether the individual was stationed in South Korea or was only visiting as a tourist. This is still to be determined. The Joint Security Area or JSA, located in the Demilitarized Zone or DMZ, which stretches along the military demarcation line which the U.S. national crossed, serves as the line dividing South and North Korea. Currently, the UN command believes the U.S. national is in North Korean custody, adding they are working with their Korean People's Army or KPA counterparts to solve the issue. To note, Korean People's Army is in the North Korean military. Meanwhile, South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff alluded the incident to the UN command and has declined to give any comment regarding the matter. Solely Subgosela Yunimnida, SMNI News, South Korea.
A spokesman for the U.S. State Department said that America is closely watching the developments in Thailand months after the general elections took place on the 14th of May. Anissa de Guzman has more.
U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller made it known that the recent legal cases filed against Thailand's prime ministerial candidate, Pita Limjaroenrat, is being monitored by Washington. Miller was referring to the two complaints filed against the Move Forward Party leader and prime ministerial candidate. The first complaint involves his controversial media shares filed in May, while the second complaint accused the embattled frontrunner of attempting to overthrow the monarchy due to his party's declared aim to amend Section 112 of the Criminal Code, also known as the Lèse Majesté Law, filed last week. In a press briefing held in Washington on Monday, the 17th of July, Miller claimed the United States does not support any particular party or politician, but made it clear it is closely watching the post-election developments, including the legal system in the Southeast Asian nation.
Let me say a few things. First, that the United States doesn't have a preferred outcome in the Thai election. We don't support any particular party or politician. What we do support is multi-party democracy and a post-election process that reflects the will of the Thai people and supports a democratic and prosperous future for Thailand. We are very closely watching the post-election developments. That includes the recent developments in the legal system, which are of concern. We believe this moment is an opportunity for Thailand to demonstrate its commitment to democracy.
When asked to comment on how the U.S. will react to the possibility of Pita being disqualified from office, Miller said he would not speculate on things that have not yet occurred.
I don't want to speculate about how we might react to events that have not yet occurred. I will say that we are watching it closely, and the recent developments are of concern to us.
PETA will make his second attempt to win a prime ministerial vote in Parliament on Wednesday. The vote will be held on the same day the court is expected to decide whether to accept one of the cases related to his controversial media shares. The embattled prime ministerial hopeful said Move Forward Party is willing to adjust its ambitious reforms if he becomes premier, but will not back down on a plan to change the lèse-majesté law or the law that forbids insulting the monarchy, which has been present in Thai criminal code since the early 1900s. Di siya Nanisa de Guzman, Drangan Chakuntep Mahanakon, SMNI News, Pratet Thai, Sawadika.
Japan, the United States, and South Korea is scheduled to have talks to discuss North Korea's recent test launch of intercontinental ballistic missile. Let's find out more from Ria Saito.
Following North Korea's launching of its intercontinental ballistic missile, senior officials from the United States, South Korea, and Japan are scheduled to meet and tackle measures on how to counter North Korea's recent missile test launched. The planned talks were made by the U.S. State Department and announced Monday following North Korea's latest provocation by launching its first solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-18. The meeting that will be held on Thursday in Karuizawa, southeastern part of Nagano Prefecture, that will be attended by senior officials from Japan's Foreign Ministry's Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau, Funakoshi Takehiro, U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Ambassador Sung Kim, and Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs Kim Gun. It can be remembered last Wednesday, July 12th, North Korea had its test launch of Hwasong-18 that fell into the sea 250 kilometers west of Okushiri Island, Japan's northernmost main island of Hokkaido. The talks will be chiefly about how to respond to North Korea's series of missile test launch. Since the three leaders are concerned that North Korea will likely conduct more missile launches and its seventh nuclear test. It can be noted that according to North Korea's state-run media, the Korean Central News Agency or KCNA, Kim Jong-un's sister issued a statement Monday stating that the launch last week of what the U.S. witnessed was just the beginning of North Korea's already launched military offensive. Ijo, Nihon Kara sa Itoria News at Shimashita, SMNI News, Japan.
An expert warned that Australia is making itself a bigger military threat to China as it places itself in the middle of escalating tensions between Canberra and Beijing. Sheena Selim for the details.
A leading defense analyst warned that Australia's decision to bring U.S. combat forces and the adoption of a military strategy designed to defeat China are fatal decisions that could end in a nuclear catastrophe. Sam Rogovin, a former Australian intelligence analyst and the director of the Laoag Institute's International Security Program, made a stark warning in an essay published this week in the Australian Foreign Affairs Journal. According to the defense analyst, Canberra is making a critical decision that is not suited to Australia's national security interest. These include hosting up to 6 U.S. B-52 bombers in the Northern Territory that could be assigned to strike China's nuclear infrastructure, along with Canberra's plans to acquire nuclear-powered submarines through the AUKUS deal. He added that the nuclear-powered submarines could be assigned to sink Chinese naval ships and submarines or strike targets in China with cruise missiles in the event of war. Australia's plan to acquire hypersonic weapons through the AUKUS deal could also increase the country's risk of being highly visible in the eyes of Chinese military planners. Moreover, American bombers flying out of the Royal Australian Air Force Military Airbase in the Northern Territory would make it an important target for Chinese forces. The expert proposed that Australia's previous notion that it is likely to be safer within the alliance needs to be reevaluated. He added that contrary to what many believe, the United States has not increased its military power in Asia, hence raising questions about its long-term commitment. Reporting from New South Wales, this is Sheena Selim, SMNI News, Australia.
The wildfire crisis in Canada has made a record-breaking history as the total area in the country burned reaches past 10 million hectares. Here's more from Merck's Buzara.
Canada is currently facing an extremely severe wildfire crisis with more than 10 million hectares of land burned. This is a record-breaking number and the situation is very serious. Since the beginning of the year, there have been 4,088 fires that have caused extensive damage and forced over 150 people to leave their homes. Most of these fires are out of control and had a devastating impact on the environment. Currently, there are more than 900 active fires across the entire country, affecting every province. The areas where the fires are happening have shifted from Alberta to Nova Scotia, Quebec, and now British Columbia. In British Columbia alone, more than 250 fires were started by lightning strikes in just 3 days. Sadly, another firefighter have lost their life in the Northwest Territories, adding to the recent death of 19-year-old Devin Gale in British Columbia. The nation mourns these courageous firefighters who have made the ultimate sacrifice. These wildfires are a clear indication of the urgent need for global action against climate change. If we don't significantly reduce our emissions, the risk of such disasters will continue to increase. Meanwhile, the people of Canada are united in their gratitude for the selflessness and dedication of brave firefighters who risk their lives to protect the communities. Reporting from Toronto, this has been Merx Busara, SMNI News, Canada.
Greece is battling to contain 81 wildfires across the country, fueled by a heat wave and strong winds. Greek army, police, and volunteer rescuers have been deployed to evacuate thousands of people near Athens. Reports say the wildfires began in Kovaras, an area located around 50 kilometers southeast of Athens, and the blaze spread fast amid erratic winds up to 70 kilometers per hour. Meanwhile, 1,200 children were evacuated in Loutraki town, west of Athens, as flames approached their camp. Dozens of families had to leave their homes and they were evacuated by emergency service crews. Animals have also been evacuated. The Greek government said people whose homes had been affected by the wildfires were eligible for accommodation in local hotels and that they would be compensated later. In recent days, Greece has hit temperatures as high as 40 degrees Celsius. In a significant weather update, Singapore is braced for drier conditions for what remains of this month of July. Renju Modekilio for this report.
The Meteorological Service Singapore, or MSS, has announced that the island nation can expect drier conditions for the remainder of July. As the country experiences the traditional mid-year period of warmer temperatures, residents should also brace themselves for several warm nights ahead. The MSS, responsible for monitoring and forecasting weather conditions in Singapore, reported that a high-pressure system over the region will lead to reduced cloud cover and decrease in rainfall over the coming weeks. This means that Singaporeans can anticipate clearer skies and sunnier days as the month progresses. Dr. Tan Wei Ming, a senior meteorologist at the MSS, explained the weather phenomenon, stating the presence of the high-pressure system is suppressing the formation of rain clouds and creating stable atmospheric conditions. As a result, we can expect less rainfall and drier weather for the rest of July. However, as the day's scorching heat subsides, Singaporeans should prepare for warmer nights. The evenings are expected to be accompanied by slightly higher temperatures, which could lead to discomfort during sleeping hours. The MSS advises residents to stay well hydrated and use appropriate cooling measures to ensure a restful night's sleep. The public is also reminded to remain cautious during this period of drier weather, as the reduced rainfall may lead to an increase of wildfires and higher air pollution levels. Authorities are closely monitoring the situation and urging citizens to refrain from outdoor burning or any activities that could potentially spark fires. While the drier weather is generally welcomed by those who enjoy outdoor activities, it's essential to remember the importance of water conservation. With less rainfall, water resources may be strained, and the responsible use of water is crucial to ensure a sustainable supply for everyone. As the weather patterns evolve, the MSS will continue to provide regular updates to keep the public informed and prepared for any changes in weather conditions. Singaporeans are encouraged to stay tuned for official weather advisories and take necessary precautions to stay safe and comfortable during this period of drier weather and warmer nights. This has been Renju Modiquillo, SMNI News, Singapore.
Members of the Philippine Congress congratulated President Bongbong Marcos for signing the Maharlika Investment Fund Act into law. MJ Mondejar reports from the Batasang Pambansa.
Speaker Martin Romualdez expressed his delight at President Bongbong Marcos signing the Maharlika Investment Fund Act, or MIF. Speaker Romualdez, one of the primary authors of the MIF in Congress, witnessed the president signing the new law at the Malacanang. The House Speaker emphasized that the new law will expand the country's fiscal space and assist in launching various projects. It will provide additional funding sources for infrastructure development without the need for increased taxes or borrowing. The House Speaker further highlighted that international investors such as the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, or JBIC, and several U.S.-based companies have already expressed their interest in the MIF. Speaker Romualdez is confident that the MIF law will become a landmark legislation of the 19th Congress. In this video, it is noticeable that President Marcos is giving instructions to House Ways and Means Chairman Joey Salceda. It was taken during the ceremonial signing of the Maharlika law. According to Salceda, the new law will serve as a bridge between trillions of investable funds in the country and thousands of investable development projects. It is said that there are around 19 trillion pesos in investable funds in the Philippine banking system. Salceda believes that these funds need to be invested for the government to generate income. The Maharlika Investment Fund, according to Salceda, is the key to achieving this. The Maharlika Investment Fund is the Philippines' first sovereign wealth fund aimed at increasing the country's funds to support economic programs. The initial capital for the MIF is expected to be 75 billion pesos this year, with 50 billion pesos coming from the Land Bank of the Philippines and 25 billion pesos from the Development Bank of the Philippines. The fund is targeted to be invested in foreign currencies, fixed income instruments, domestic and foreign corporate bonds, joint ventures, mergers and acquisitions, real estate, and large infrastructure projects that will contribute to the country's development.
That is the dream. That is what the fund is for. We hope to fuel that dream.
With that, Congressman Salceda said that the administration is now on the verge of completing the implementing rules and regulations of the new law. For God and Beloved Philippines, MJ Mondejar, SMNI News.
President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos welcomed former President Rodrigo Duterte's visit to China. More of this report from Hannah Jane Sancho.
Former President Rodrigo Duterte does not need to ask permission to visit his friend, Chinese President Xi Jinping. This is what President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said in response to the meeting between Duterte and Xi in Beijing, China on Monday.
No, permission. Hindi naman kailangan. Alam ko naman ang pupunta siya. At magkakita sila, magkakilala sila. So, I hope that napag-usapan nila yung mga issue na ngayon na mga nakikita natin, yung mga shadowing, all of these things that we are seeing now. I hope na napag-usapan nila. Para naman magkaroon tayo ng progress. Kasi yun naman talaga hapon natin. Patuloy ang pag-uusap.
President Marcos said he is open to having a new line of communication with China through former President Duterte.
I welcome any new lines of communication. If that is President PRRD, then good. Hindi importante sa akin kung sino, kung ano, basta may makausap sila, baka makatulong. So I hope, I'm sure that we will have a hindi naman report, but I'm sure he will be able to tell us what happened during the conversation and see how it affects us.
Former President Duterte and President Xi Jinping met at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing, with Xi telling Duterte that China is ready to promote steady and sustained relations with the Philippines. Xi also praised Duterte's significant contributions to bring the Philippine-China relations back on the right track. The relationship between the Philippines and China significantly improved under the Duterte administration, following several years of tension that sparked during the administration of former President Noynoy Aquino. For God and my beloved Philippines, this has been Hannah Jane Sancho, SMNI News.
The Philippine Department of Environment and Natural Resources emphasized the need to improve the work conditions and living conditions of waste pickers. The agency explains that their role is critical and important in the solid waste management efforts in the country. Jason Rubrico tells us more.
In the face of the worsening plastic pollution problem in the Philippines, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or DENR, sees the need to improve the working condition and state of life of those in the informal sector who are part of solid waste management. Environment Secretary Antonia Loizaga specifically talked about the waste pickers.
We need to invest in capacity building to transform their vulnerability. This sector is still locked out of the value chain of solid waste management, but they are in fact critical and essential as a part of the supply chain.
Loizaga said since the Extended Producer Responsibility Law has been enacted, there will be an opportunity for government and everyone to promote social inclusion. This includes, according to the Secretary, improving the livelihood of waste pickers and their communities through the development of alternative livelihood opportunities. Loizaga also emphasized the importance of working with local governments for the implementation of various programs to improve the status of the said sector.
We need to partner with LGUs to roll out financial literacy programs and to build the skills of this particular sector for entrepreneurship and other types of activities in order for them to build capital to transform their current situation.
Loizaga said it is also necessary for local government units or LGUs and other sectors to implement a robust system of data recording, tracking, and reporting. Through this, she said, the direction and the strategic impact of social protection programs will be enhanced and will direct them specifically to address the sector's needs. According to the DENR, the Philippines generates 61,000 metric tons of solid waste daily, 12 to 24% of which are plastic waste. DENR added that Filipinos utilize more than 163 million plastic sachet packets, 48 million shopping bags, and 45 million thin film bags daily, 33% of which is disposed in landfills and in dump sites, and around 35% actually end up in open environments, including oceans. For God and my beloved Philippines, I am Jason Rubrico, SMNI News.
The President of Israel has arrived in the United States amid strained relations between the two countries. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden invites Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the U.S. for an official visit. Hans Marshall tells us more.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog began his two-day visit to Washington on Tuesday to meet United States President Joe Biden. His visit comes amid heightened tensions between the two countries due to concerns about human rights issues under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. Concrete examples include Israel's expansion on the occupied West Bank and the judicial overhaul by Netanyahu's right-wing government. Meanwhile, during his visit, aside from meeting Biden, he will reportedly be meeting Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Furthermore, the official will be addressing a joint meeting of Congress on Wednesday. Still concerning Washington-Jerusalem relations, Biden has invited Netanyahu for an official visit later this year. The invitation comes after a long delay due to concerns about the aforementioned alleged human rights issues happening in the Middle Eastern country. According to reports, Biden extended the invite during a phone call between the two leaders. A senior U.S. official said that Netanyahu has agreed to meet Biden, but it is still not clear whether the meeting would take place at the White House. This is Hans Marshall reporting, SMNI News.
America's bilateral relations with Israel continues to go down the drain, with former Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid warning that his country's relations with the U.S. have deteriorated so much under the leadership of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Jayne Domingo reports.
The United States is no longer Israel's closest ally. This was said by Israeli opposition leader and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid on Monday at a faction meeting of his Yesh Atid party. Lapid argued that the government of Netanyahu is destroying the alliance with the United States by trying to pass controversial judicial reforms. In an interview with the Israeli media, Lapid said, and quote, "The Americans say they have no shared values with this government. It affects every aspect of U.S.-Israel relations, their attention and their willingness to leave their comfort zone for Israeli interest. They will not do it for the most extreme government in the history of the country." End of quote. Netanyahu has spent 12 years as the Prime Minister of Israel. But in June 2021, a coalition led by Lapid ousted Netanyahu from his position. He later returned as the Prime Minister of Israel after winning the December 2022 election. Meanwhile, in late March, U.S. President Joe Biden raised concerns about the democracy of Israel over months of protests due to the proposed judicial reforms. Biden said, and quote, "Like many strong supporters of Israel, I'm very concerned. I'm concerned that they get this straight. They cannot continue down this road. Netanyahu won't be invited to the White House in the near term." End of quote. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to Biden, saying that Israel is a sovereign country and makes decisions by the will of its people and not based on pressures from abroad, including from the best of friends. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir also blasted Biden, saying that the U.S. president needs to understand and that he expects Biden to understand that Israel is no longer a star on the American flag and that Israel is a democratic country. It can be remembered that on Monday, Biden invited Netanyahu to visit the White House later this year. This comes after the American government criticized West Jerusalem's approval for a Jewish-only settlement in the West Bank. Biden's recent invitation also comes after he criticized the Israeli government's cabinet by calling them a part of the problem in the Palestinian conflict. Reporting for Newsline World, this has been Jayne Domingo, SMNI News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin made a chilling warning following the arrival of cluster munitions sent by the United States to Ukraine. Carlo de la Peña for the details.
American officials recently confirmed that cluster munitions provided by their country have already arrived in Ukraine amid opposition from international organizations, allies, and NATO member states. To this, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that if Ukraine uses such weapons on the battlefield, then his country reserves the right to retaliate in kind. Putin said the U.S. administration itself gave an assessment of these munitions through the mouths of its employees some time ago, calling the use of these munitions a crime. The Russian president believes cluster munitions should be regarded. Putin is likely referring to a statement made by ex-White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki in February 2022.
There are reports of illegal cluster bombs and vacuum bombs being used by the Russians. If that's true, what is the next step of this administration, and is there a red line for how much violence will be tolerated against civilians in this manner that's illegal and potentially a war crime?
It would be. I don't have any confirmation of that. We have seen the reports. If that were true, it would potentially be a war crime.
Meanwhile, Putin said his country has huge stockpiles of various types of such weapons, and so far he has not used them despite the shortage of ammunition at certain points. Putin's claim of not yet using cluster munitions is in contrast to some international organizations claiming that both Russia and Ukraine are using the controversial weapons since the conflict broke out in February 2022. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on July 11th warned that Russian cluster munitions are much more effective than American ones, as their range is broader and more diverse. It can be remembered that U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan rejected criticisms over the controversial weapons, saying that Washington retains its moral authority by providing cluster munitions for Ukraine. Meanwhile, earlier this month, U.S. President Joe Biden in a CNN interview suggested that the U.S. and Ukraine had shortages of ammo. That's why America decided to provide cluster munitions. The controversial weapons are banned in more than 100 countries due to the risk they pose to civilians because some of the bomblets it releases fail to detonate. According to Amnesty International, over 86,500 civilians have been killed by cluster munitions since World War II. Reporting, this has been Carlo de la Peña, SMNI News.
Russia's defense ministry claims that their forces have destroyed Ukrainian naval terror drone bases as a retaliation to the Crimean bridge attack that killed 2 civilian lives. Here's my report. In retaliation to Monday's attack on the Crimean bridge, the Russian military conducted strikes on Ukrainian facilities overnight using high-precision sea-based weapons. Russia said the attack was aimed at facilities that were used to prepare what they called as terrorist acts against Russia, involving unmanned drones and a shipyard in the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa that produced them. Moscow forces also targeted depots in Odessa and Mykolaiv. Russia said it contained around 70,000 tons of fuel that is believed to be meant for the Ukrainian military. Odessa administration head Sergei Bratchuk on Tuesday said that 6-caliber rocket missiles attacked the city, but claimed that all of them had been downed. Bratchuk, however, noted that port infrastructure facilities as well as several other buildings were damaged due to the strike. Following the destruction of the Crimean bridge that left 2 civilians killed and injured 1 teenager, the 2 civilians were identified as Alexei Kulik, 40, and his wife Natalia, 36. Their 14-year-old daughter, Angelina, is now orphaned. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed to take revenge and ordered the defense ministry of his country to take precise measures. Putin said Russia would retaliate harshly for the attack and urged officials to ramp up security measures around the Crimean bridge. Meanwhile, Russia partially opened the Crimean bridge after the attack, but vehicles are alternating in the use of the rightmost lane between Kerch and Taman. While no pillars were damaged in the blast, one of the inner segments of the bridge has partially collapsed. Russian authorities said the repairs will take weeks. The Russian military also said that it thwarted yet another attempted mass drone strike in the east of the Crimean Peninsula on Tuesday morning, but no casualties or damage on the ground occurred. Reporting, this has been Jayne Codnita, SMNI News. Meanwhile, Russia threatened to use Wagner fighters to invade a strategic piece of land between Poland and Lithuania in a matter of hours. Kirby Hill Trinidad for the rest of the details.
A senior official in Russia's parliament revealed the Kremlin's plan to seize control of NATO's weakest links in a move that could trigger World War III. Reservist Colonel General Andrei Katarpolov, head of State Duma's Defense Committee, or the lower house of the Russian Federal Assembly, told State TV that Wagner fighters were ready to march on the Suwalki corridor in a matter of hours. The Suwalki corridor, also known as the Suwalki Gap, is a 60-mile-long strip between the border of Poland and Lithuania. The corridor links 3 former Soviet Baltic republics, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and has massive strategic importance for NATO, the EU, as well as Russia. For the West, the seizure of the corridor will weaken Russian President Vladimir Putin in the event the current tension between the East and the West worsens. But for Russia, seizure of the 60-mile-long strip of land would link Kaliningrad, the main base of Putin's Baltic fleet, and Belarus, which is one of the closest allies of the Kremlin. Russia labeled the sparsely populated territory as NATO's Achilles heel, or one of the weakest links of the world's largest military alliance. The corridor has been branded the most dangerous place on Earth because it could be the first point of contact in a Third World War. An attack from Wagner would likely trigger NATO's Article 5 collective defense obligations, which states an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all members. The threat from Moscow urged Poland to rapidly rearm its troops amid reports of NATO's plan to immediately transfer 100,000 soldiers to the Central European country. Meanwhile, dozens of American, French, and Lithuanian soldiers are conducting a one-week military exercise in eastern Lithuania days after the two-day NATO summit ended in Vilnius. Reporting from Sweden, this has been Cablelink, SMNI News.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan starts his three-day diplomatic tour in the Middle East by visiting Saudi Arabia. Melchizedek Cadiz reports.
An entourage of 200 business people accompanied Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as he visited Saudi Arabia during the first leg of his three-day visit to the Gulf region. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman welcomed the Turkish leader with an official ceremony, followed by a delegation-level meeting focused on economic cooperation as well as regional and international issues will be on the agenda. His trip to Saudi Arabia will be followed by a visit to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. Business forums have been arranged during his three-day trip in the region this week. The trip comes as Turkey battles a currency collapse and soaring inflation. According to some senior Turkish officials, Turkey expects Gulf countries to make direct investments of about $10 billion as part of Erdogan's trip and for it to reach $30 billion over time. Saudi trade with Turkey has grown the fastest of all countries in the Gulf region, with bilateral trade between the two states reaching $6.5 billion in 2022. Reporting, this has been Melchizedek Cadiz, SMNI News, Kuwait.
The International Criminal Court Appeals Chamber junked the Philippine government's efforts to block the Jaguar probe. The Department of Justice, on the other hand, insisted that the ICC is not welcome in the Philippines. Margaret Gonzalez files this report.
It was 4 in the afternoon in the Philippines when the International Criminal Court, or ICC Appeals Chamber, streamed its unfavorable rulings on the Philippine government plea on the Jaguar probe. 3 out of 5 members in the chamber junked the Philippine government's plea against the resumption of the probe and all the arguments raised by the country, including the lack of jurisdiction of the ICC to conduct the investigation. The chamber said the decision was not on the jurisdiction and said further that the government failed to properly raise the impact of its withdrawal from the Rome Statute.
The issue of the impact of the Philippines' withdrawal from the statute on the court's jurisdiction was neither properly raised nor adequately ventilated before the pretrial chamber.
The Office of the Solicitor General, however, denied the majority of the chamber's claim on the issue of jurisdiction.
The issue of jurisdiction is properly raised before the appeals chamber because the pretrial chamber's finding on jurisdiction is an integral part of the impugned decision. The established principle of international law dictates that the court must satisfy itself of its own jurisdiction, and this power to determine its own jurisdiction exists regardless of whether the court is called upon to exercise this power or not.
2 members of the chamber, including the presiding judge, opposed the resumption of the probe.
The appeals chamber, by majority, Judge Codnita and myself dissenting, rejects the appeal and confirms the impugned decision.
To remember, the pre-trial chamber authorized the investigation on September 15, 2021. On November 18 of the same year, the ICC prosecutor informed the chamber that the Republic of the Philippines requested to defer the probe. On June 24, 2022, the ICC prosecutor requested the chamber to resume the investigation. While on January 26, 2023, ICC pre-trial chamber 1 granted the prosecutor's request to resume the investigations into the situations of the Republic of the Philippines. On February 3, 2023, the Philippine government filed its notice of appeal against pre-trial chamber 1's authorization. The DOJ, on the other hand, insisted even before the ruling that the ICC is not welcome in the Philippines. Justice Secretary Crispin Remulla said that government will not allow any ICC investigation on the Jaguar, saying that they will not comply even if ICC issues a warrant of arrest.
Hindi, wala silang gagawin dito eh. Wala silang kilalaman sa atin dito. At anong gagawin nila? Papasukin nila tayo? Gusto ba nilang pasukin tayo bilang isang kolonya na naman? Tapos na yun eh. Ginawa na tayong kolonya dati ng ng Espanya, ginawa na tayong kolonya ng Amerika, ginawa na tayong kolonya ng Japan nung araw, pero tama na. Hindi sila welcome sa Pilipinas. Tayo po ay very hospitable people. Kaya lang, pagka pakikialam na ang gagawin nila, ay hindi po tayo papayag.
Secretary Remulla said that politics has influenced the rulings.
Politika yan. It's going to be a political, in the end, ang gana niyan ay politika. Katulad ng paglapit ng mga CPP, NPA sa United Nations nung araw, pinupolitika nila. Ganun din yan. Naghaharap sila ng international forum para idulog yung kanilang politika sapagkat hindi nila maidulog dito sa ating bansa.
Philippine Government Foreign Counsel Sara Bahadfel emphasized that the Philippines has legal remedies should the ICC insist on arresting individuals, assuring that despite the rulings, the ICC cannot impose police power.
Just to emphasize that there are no police powers for the ICC. It's important to note it does not have any enforcement powers. As I mentioned, it's very much reliant on the cooperation of states, parties.
For God and my beloved country, this has been Margaret Gonzalez, SMNI News.
Today, we'll look at artificial intelligence, which has become immensely popular this year with the emergence of ChatGPT, the AI text chatbot. While some call the technology hype, others say it will be transformative for societies. Regardless, governments around the world are now looking at ways to regulate this industry, which is growing rapidly. Let's hear more of this story from Yang Chengxi.
Thing that's been preying on the minds of people recently. Is the world about to be transformed through artificial intelligence?
ChatGPT is a deep learning model that is designed to generate human-like text.
By a certain date, we were going to have computers that had emotions and feelings.
The recent explosion of consumer-use generative AI actually goes far beyond text chatbots.
Hello. I'm an alternate version of you. I'm younger and better looking, but my face doesn't exist in the real world because I'm created by a combination of AI tools. With a few commands, I can be in another place, transform into another person,
and speak in another voice. If I'm plugged into ChatGPT, I can even answer all your questions.
This trend could look cool to some, but concerning to others. A recent open letter by leading AI experts called for a pause in the development of more powerful models. Some even fear that AI could ultimately turn supervillain. It's called the Terminator scenario.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
So, what potential harm could advanced AI tools like ChatGPT do to society?
Let's see. Among other issues, they could create biases, spread misinformation, and violate privacy. So it is important to establish ethical frameworks and regulations.
Many governments are working on related policies. China has issued a draft regulation over generative AI, with public consultation finishing in May. With several Chinese companies rolling out their own chatbots, the need for proper industry oversight and guidelines is clear. The more than 20 articles in the draft are a lot to digest, so this time I'm asking a Chinese-developed language model to break it down. I fed the whole text for it to summarize, and I'll let my handsome AI avatar narrate it.
First, generated content should embody socialist core values. Second, measures should be taken to prevent discrimination. Third, providers should respect privacy, intellectual property rights, and business ethics and avoid unfair competition. The draft also says providers should register their algorithms with the authority and lists punishments for rule violations.
It's hardly a surprise that generative AI's political implications have become a top priority for policymakers worldwide. In a recent G7 meeting, ministers discussed AI regulations that preserve democratic values and address disinformation from foreign forces. As for the draft's emphasis on bias and discrimination, it's something that ChatGPT had been previously accused of until it later made improvements. I talked to two experts about this. Kai Shen from consulting firm McKinsey believes generative AI can actually reduce bias and discrimination in the workplace going forward.
In some ways, I actually think that with AI, it's becoming more objective because there's actually ways you can go and look at the decision making, actually detect biases. It helps you to make better decisions. And if you think about a large company, probably on the order of hundreds of decisions that are being made. And if you can improve the accuracy and the quality of each decision by just 2 or 3%, the impact is massive.
But experts do remain vigilant. To avoid illicit AI-generated results requires proper training for technicians who train AI models. Ken Zheng from financial service firm PwC also discussed the importance of human guardrails in companies that use these services.
It's really have a human agency to look at all the results, to look at all the errors and the bias and the performance instability, just to assess whether the model itself gives consistent result and able to explain the result efficiently to address all the questions raised through the process. We call it explainable AI.
Whether you champion the power of AI model or human supervision or both, undesired AI results can still appear. When they do, enforcing proper punishment is a whole other challenge for regulators.
There are concerns that experts have raised but do not yet have conclusive answers to. Article 5 of the draft is an example. It says that the providers of generative AI services should assume the responsibility of the content producer. Well, then what about the users who gave the commands that generated the illicit results? Who's more responsible? When AI's content generation mechanism is this complex, assigning culpability might not be as clear-cut a matter as it seems.
Their filtering mechanisms can be easily bypassed by malicious users, which can result in the generation of illegal content.
This is a glaring issue that warrants continued research on policy and tech solutions. Qihu 360, a Chinese internet security firm, has been entrusted by the Ministry of Science and Technology with the responsibility of conducting collaborative AI safety research with domestic partners, a delicate task.
There are many uncertainties regarding its security risks and how it would develop. If we impose overly strict regulations on it from the beginning, it may stifle innovation. Hey, here's a fun fact.
Yeah?
Even the creator of Midjourney, the AI that generated my face, said in an interview that he doesn't fully understand how his own AI works.
That's exciting and scary at the same time.
So I guess regulating AI is a matter that needs constant studying.
Of course, I have not been talking to an actual AI. The dialogues you just heard were all scripted in order to illustrate my points. But they are also in homage to a 2013 film called Her, which depicts a man's relationship with his AI chatbot whose intelligence grows beyond control. Many people, including me at the time, wouldn't have believed that the plot would come this much closer to reality just a decade later.
Meanwhile, the Australian state of Victoria has officially cancelled its plan to host an international multi-sport event in 2026. The much-awaited Commonwealth Games was supposed to gather athletes from dozens of countries worldwide, including the former territories of the British Empire. Sasha Haza has the news.
In a media conference held on Tuesday morning, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews just made a disappointing announcement regarding the 2026 Commonwealth Games. The Premier has confirmed that the Games will no longer be taking place in the Australian state as planned. Speaking in front of a group of reporters, Andrews revealed that the primary reason for the cancellation is the immense financial burden associated with hosting such a large-scale event. For the Victorian Premier, spending between 6 to 7 billion Australian dollars for a 12-day sporting event does not represent value for money but rather all cost and no benefit. The initial budget to host the Games in 2026 was initially declared at $2.6 billion. However, the cost eventually piled up to $6 billion and was predicted to exceed more than that. Andrews acknowledged the potential benefits that the Games could have brought to Victoria, such as economic growth, increased tourism, and international exposure for the Australian state of more than 6 million people. He added that the decision to cancel the Games was made after careful deliberation and consultations with various stakeholders, including the Commonwealth Games Federation, as it became clear that the costs involved would pose a significant strain on the Australian state's resources. The disappointment is palpable among athletes, sport fans, and the broader community, and has left many athletes who have been training tirelessly heartbroken at the announcement. However, the Premier emphasized that this cancellation does not signify the end of Victoria's aspirations to host major sporting events, and assured that efforts would be made to support these athletes as well as explore alternative opportunities for them to showcase their talents. The cancellation of the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Victoria, announced 973 days until the start of the event, has undoubtedly dealt a blow to the sporting community. Athletes who have been training for years find themselves grappling with disappointment. Nevertheless, Victoria's commitment to future opportunities demonstrates resilience and a determination to bounce back. Reporting from Sydney, this has been Sasha Hassa, SMNI News, Australia.
And before we end, may you be inspired with the message of the appointed Son of God. Whatever that is not of faith is sin. And that's all for today's edition of Newsline World. For more news update, you may visit SMNINewsChannel.com or follow us on our official social media accounts on Rumble, Facebook, and Twitter. For God and my beloved country, the Philippines, I'm Jayne Codnita. Thank you for watching Newsline World, and thank you to our beloved Pastor Apollo Sikibuler, for the opportunity to be part of this program. May you continue to listen to SMNI as it delivers nothing but fair, truthful, and balanced news, because SMNI is your source of credible news.